Chapter 1. First Encounter. The first time they met, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Luca, a prominent alpha, exuded authority with every step he took. His reputation preceded him, sharp, commanding, and never one to shy away from a challenge. As CEO of a massive corporation, his every move was calculated, and he was known for keeping control of every situation. But when he locked eyes with Dante, a fellow alpha, something shifted. Dante was no ordinary alpha. He didn't wear his power like a crown, but it was there, quiet, dangerous, and unyielding. Their first meeting was accidental, or so it seemed at the time. Luca had called a high-level strategy meeting, expecting it to be routine, until Dante entered the room. The air thickened the moment Dante stepped through the door, his presence undeniable, his posture confident yet relaxed. He was here to challenge, to claim, to prove he was just as powerful as any alpha in the room. Luca's gaze lingered on him longer than necessary, his mind working to figure out the other alpha's intentions. Dante caught the look, not intimidated in the slightest, but rather amused. There was no need for words. Each knew the other's rank, and yet the silence spoke volumes. The tension simmered between them, unnoticed by everyone else in the room. "So, it seems we both have our stake in this," Dante's voice broke the silence. His words were casual, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. Luca didn't answer right away. He studied Dante, taking in the way he held himself, the subtle power he radiated. "It does," he replied finally, his voice low, the undercurrent of challenge clear. "But I've never been one to back down from competition." Dante smirked. "I don't expect you to." Chapter 2. Power Struggles. After the meeting, the weeks that followed were a series of power plays. Dante was an enigma, always present but never fully revealing his hand. He was respected, even feared, in the corporate world, but there was something in his demeanor that piqued Luca's interest. Dante didn't rush to claim power. Instead, he let it settle naturally, a silent force that made everyone around him shift and adapt. Luca, on the other hand, was used to being the dominant force. He wasn't accustomed to sharing the spotlight, especially with another alpha who seemed just as capable, just as ruthless. Yet, something in Dante's gaze challenged Luca in a way he wasn't prepared for. It was as if Dante didn't care about dominance in the way others did. He was confident in his own right, and that subtle difference only made Luca more intrigued. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, Luca found himself alone in the building's lounge area, nursing a drink. He'd barely had time to reflect on the day's events when Dante appeared, his presence as commanding as ever. But this time, there was no challenge in the air. Instead, it felt like a subtle understanding, a mutual recognition. "Couldn't help but notice you weren't at the post-meeting reception," Dante said casually, standing near the door, not quite approaching, but not backing away either. Luca raised an eyebrow. "I find it hard to relax around people who don't know when to stop talking." Dante chuckled. "I get that. But I wouldn't mind some company." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Luca considered walking away. But something in Dante's gaze stopped him. There was no pretense, no game being played, just raw, unspoken respect between two men who recognized something in each other. Luca nodded and took a step forward. "All right. Let's see if you can hold up your end of the conversation." Chapter 3. Growing Tension. As days turned into weeks, their interactions became more frequent. At first, it was purely professional, discussions about strategy, business decisions, and future ventures. But with each conversation, the underlying tension grew stronger. They both respected each other's abilities, but there was an undeniable chemistry between them that neither could ignore. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance here, a brush of their hands there. But it was always there, always simmering just below the surface. One afternoon, as they walked through the office together, their bodies nearly brushed against one another as they made their way down the hall. The small touch sent a jolt through Luca's body, and he quickly adjusted his posture, trying to ignore the stir of desire that threatened to break his control. Dante, however, seemed unfazed. His eyes met Luca's, and for a brief moment, there was something in them, something that mirrored Luca's own desire. But neither spoke of it. They couldn't afford to. Not in this world where power dynamics were everything. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Luca said suddenly, his voice low and commanding. "You know why you're here. I'm not interested in games." Dante's lips curled into a small smile. "I never play games, Luca. You should know that by now." Luca's breath caught. There was something about the way Dante said his name, intimate, personal, almost as if they had already crossed a line they couldn't go back from. Chapter 4. The Challenge. Their first real moment of confrontation came late one evening. The office was nearly empty, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Dante had stayed behind to finish a report, and Luca was, as always, working late to keep on top of everything. But tonight, their work felt like a prelude to something far more intense. Dante entered Luca's office, his footsteps quiet but certain. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice smooth, almost teasing. "I thought we had a mutual understanding." Luca looked up from his desk, his eyes meeting Dante's. The air between them thickened instantly, the electricity crackling with unspoken words. "I don't avoid anything," Luca replied, his voice steady, but his pulse quickening in a way he wasn't prepared for. Dante leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, but there was a fire in his eyes that Luca couldn't ignore. "No." "Then why are we still playing this game?" Luca stood up, walking slowly toward Dante. "Because I haven't decided if you're worth the risk." Dante's gaze never wavered. "The risk?" He pushed off the doorframe, stepping closer until there was barely any space between them. "Maybe the risk is something you need, Luca. To remind you what it feels like to lose control." For the first time, Luca hesitated. The air between them crackled, the intensity undeniable. They were two alphas, equal in power, equal in ambition. But in this moment, all the professional distance they had created collapsed. There was no more strategy, no more games. Just the raw magnetism of two men standing on the edge of something dangerous, something undeniable. Luca's heart raced as he took the final step, bringing them face to face. "What happens now?" he whispered, the tension unbearable. Dante smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes but burned with the promise of something deeper. "Now, we see who has the strength to take what they want." Chapter 5. Tides of Change. Luca's heart raced as he stood before Dante, their proximity too close, yet he couldn't seem to move away. Dante's gaze was intense, but there was something vulnerable about it now, something raw that Luca had never seen before. His breath was shallow as he took a step closer, unable to stop himself. Their shared space felt like a magnet, pulling them toward each other, their bodies aching for the connection they could no longer deny. "I shouldn't be this close to you," Luca muttered, his voice hoarse as he spoke the words that seemed to betray him. He should have pulled back, but his body refused to listen. The tension between them thickened, curling around them like smoke. Dante didn't say anything, but the flicker of desire in his eyes made Luca's skin flush. Dante's voice was a low murmur, something almost dangerous in his words. "Then why are you still here, Luca?" His hand reached out tentatively, brushing against Luca's arm. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it was enough to set Luca's senses on fire. He closed his eyes for a moment, his mind spinning with the implications of what was happening between them. He could feel the heat rising from Dante's touch, and it was as if the world had narrowed to just this moment, just the two of them. The intensity of Dante's gaze only grew, his words laced with a mix of frustration and something deeper, something Luca couldn't quite place. "I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting you, even when I know I should." The confession lingered in the air, thick with tension. Luca swallowed, the raw honesty in Dante's voice doing something to his resolve. He should push him away, but the warmth of Dante's proximity called to him, making the words stick in his throat. Luca leaned in slightly, his lips brushing against Dante's cheek in a soft, lingering kiss that sent a shockwave through both of them. He pulled back just enough to see Dante's reaction, but the look in Dante's eyes, fierce and searching, sent a spark of heat straight to his core. This wasn't a simple kiss. This was a confession, a silent admission of everything they had been avoiding. The room seemed to grow smaller as Luca moved closer, his hands tentative at first as he cupped Dante's face. His thumb traced the sharp line of Dante's jaw, and with every small movement, the world outside the room seemed to fade away. "I didn't come here to make this harder," Luca whispered, his breath warm against Dante's lips. But the words fell flat, drowned out by the growing need that neither of them could suppress anymore. Dante's hands found Luca's waist, pulling him in with a force that startled him. There was no hesitation now, no restraint in the way Dante's lips pressed against his. The kiss was deep, urgent, and every ounce of tension they had carried between them snapped. The pressure in Luca's chest, the tightness in his throat, all seemed to melt away under Dante's touch. He responded with a fierceness that matched Dante's, his hands threading through Dante's hair as their bodies came together with an intensity that was undeniable. Luca felt his heart race, every part of him ignited by Dante's touch. It was as if everything they had been avoiding, every unspoken word, was finally coming to the surface. But just as quickly as it had started, Dante pulled away slightly, his breathing heavy. His forehead pressed against Luca's as he spoke in a breathless whisper. "I need you to know, this isn't just about tonight. It's not just a fleeting thing for me." The vulnerability in Dante's voice hit Luca harder than he expected. It was a raw honesty, a depth of feeling that Luca wasn't prepared for. But as he stared into Dante's eyes, he realized something. He wasn't ready to walk away from this either. The need between them was too strong, too real. Luca closed his eyes for a moment, grounding himself in the connection that had now begun to define them both. Dante's hand rested gently on Luca's back, his touch warm and reassuring. It wasn't just about the physicality. It was about trust, about something deeper that neither of them had fully understood until now. Luca leaned into him, his breath shaky but steady. "Then don't let me go," Luca murmured, his voice barely a whisper, but it was enough to let Dante know exactly what he needed. Dante's lips brushed against his forehead, and Luca closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him. Their bond, still fragile but undeniable, had taken root in a way neither of them could ignore. And for the first time in a long time, Luca let himself believe that. Maybe, just maybe, he could stop running from this connection. Chapter 6. Unspoken Words. The next morning, the silence between them was suffocating. Luca could feel Dante's presence even without speaking, the air thick with unspoken words. They had crossed a line the night before, and while part of Luca wanted to distance himself, another part was too entangled in the moments they shared. He sat at the edge of the bed, his back to Dante, avoiding the quiet tension that seemed to stretch between them. Dante's voice broke the silence, low and hesitant. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I know it's complicated." His words were careful, as if testing the waters, but Luca felt the weight of them more than anything. His heart raced, torn between the desire to stay and the urge to pull away. He couldn't deny how much he wanted to be close to Dante, but there were still walls inside him, walls he didn't know how to break. Luca turned slightly, meeting Dante's gaze, his eyes soft but serious. "You don't have to apologize for anything, Dante. But this, it changes everything. I don't know how to handle it, not with everything else going on." The words felt heavy, but they were the truth. There was so much they had yet to face, so many complications that lingered in the back of Luca's mind. Dante's expression softened, and for a moment, the tension between them seemed to ease. He moved closer, his hand resting gently on Luca's shoulder. "I don't have the answers either, but I want to try. I'm willing to figure this out with you." The sincerity in his voice made Luca's chest tighten. For the first time, Luca realized that maybe they didn't have to have all the answers, as long as they were willing to face it together. Chapter 7. A Slow Burn. The days after that moment were a blur of quiet conversations and stolen glances. Luca couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably changed between them, and yet the weight of their unspoken words hung heavily in the air. Every touch, every smile from Dante felt like an uncharted territory, unpredictable but magnetic. Luca tried to bury the fear rising in his chest, but it was hard to ignore when Dante's presence seemed to consume him. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over their shared space, Dante finally broke the silence once more. "You've been distant," he observed, his voice gentle yet laced with a quiet concern. Luca's heart skipped, caught off guard by the tenderness in Dante's words. "I'm not distant," Luca responded quickly, though the shaky edge to his voice betrayed him. "I'm just trying to understand what this is." Dante didn't pull away, his expression thoughtful. He stepped closer, his hand lightly brushing against Luca's arm in a soothing gesture. "You don't have to figure it out all at once. I'm here, Luca. I'm not going anywhere." The promise in Dante's voice settled around them like a blanket, the warmth of his words seeping into Luca's skin. It was a relief, but also terrifying in its own way. How much trust was required to let go of the fear and simply be present? Luca met Dante's gaze, their faces inches apart, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with tension, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, the weight of their connection was not a burden, but an invitation to be something more, something that neither of them had expected to find. Luca's breath caught in his throat as he leaned forward, his lips finding Dante's in a soft, tentative kiss that spoke volumes without a single word. In that moment, Luca knew this wasn't something they could walk away from. Chapter 8. Cracks in the Facade. Luca spent the next few days trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They worked together, shared meals, and conversed as if nothing had changed. But Luca could feel it, the tension that lingered between them, simmering just beneath the surface. The kiss from the night before had left him feeling both electrified and unsettled. It wasn't just the touch, the closeness, it was the unspoken bond that seemed to have formed, a bond neither of them knew how to navigate. Dante seemed to sense it too. He was quieter than usual, his eyes following Luca with an intensity that was both comforting and unnerving. The quiet moments between them stretched long, each second heavy with the weight of their unspoken feelings. Yet neither of them dared to address it. Instead, they danced around the truth, playing the game of pretending that everything was fine. One evening, as they sat together in silence, Luca couldn't take it anymore. His voice broke through the stillness, raw and vulnerable. "Do you ever think about what this means?" His words were soft, almost a whisper, but they carried the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. Dante looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, Luca saw the uncertainty in his eyes. "All the time," Dante replied, his voice low and rough. "But I don't know how to put it into words. Us, it's bigger than anything I've ever known." Luca swallowed hard, his chest tightening at the raw honesty in Dante's voice. They were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could either pull them closer or tear them apart. And yet, despite the fear that gnawed at him, Luca couldn't bring himself to walk away. Because deep down, he knew that whatever they were, however uncertain it might be, it was worth exploring, worth the risk. The pull between them was undeniable. Chapter 9. Uncharted Waters. Luca sat by the window, gazing out at the city below, his thoughts far from the busy streets and passing cars. Dante had left for a meeting earlier, and the space between them felt oddly empty. The air in the room seemed thinner, as though it too felt the weight of their last conversation. Luca had never been one to shy away from difficult truths, but this was new. He wasn't sure how to handle it, this quiet tension that pulsed between them when they were together, and the loneliness when they were apart. When Dante returned, his presence filled the space in an instant, as if he had never left. Luca turned to him, trying to smile, but it felt forced. Dante didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, but he said nothing. Instead, he moved closer, his gaze meeting Luca's with a quiet intensity. "You look like you've been 1,000 miles away," Dante said, his voice a touch playful, though Luca could sense the underlying concern. "I've just been thinking," Luca admitted, his voice almost hesitant, "about everything. I'm just not sure how to move forward." Dante's expression softened, and for a moment, Luca saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "We don't have to have all the answers, Luca. We just have to keep going, together." The simple, straightforward words settled in Luca's chest, and for the first time in days, he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Luca moved closer, closing the distance between them, his hand gently brushing against Dante's arm. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Dante reached out, cupping his face in his hands. "I know. But you're not alone in this." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Luca felt the raw vulnerability between them, an unspoken promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 10. Breaking Point. Days passed, and the weight of their unspoken feelings continued to hang heavy between them. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was the opposite. Everything between them was so intense, so fragile, that it felt like the slightest wrong move could break the delicate balance they had worked so hard to build. The tension only deepened, and Luca found himself at the edge, unsure of whether to take another step or pull back before things got even more complicated. Dante was the first to break. "This can't keep going like this," he said one evening, his voice tight with frustration. Luca looked up, his heart racing, his mind spinning. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he knew exactly what Dante was talking about. The space between them had become a chasm, filled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Dante ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "I want more, Luca. But I don't know how to get there with all this uncertainty." Luca swallowed hard, his emotions a storm inside him. "I don't know if I can give you that," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can be what you need." The words were out before he could stop them, and they hung between them, heavy with finality. Dante's expression softened, and he took a step forward, closing the gap between them. "I don't need perfection," he said quietly. "I just need you." His words, simple and sincere, cut through the tension, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Luca felt the walls inside him begin to crumble. Luca let out a shaky breath, his eyes closing for a moment as the weight of his fears lifted just a little. "I don't want to lose you," he admitted softly. "I'm scared, Dante. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of getting too close." Dante reached out, cupping his face gently. "We'll take it slow. I'll wait for you. But I'm not going anywhere." Chapter 11. The Cost of Fear. They tried to move forward, but fear still clung to Luca like a second skin. Each day brought a new battle, within himself, and sometimes between them. The quiet moments felt heavier, each shared glance laden with so much unsaid. Dante was patient, his actions gentle, but Luca couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was still holding back, something that might eventually pull them apart. It was a quiet night, the air cool and crisp, when Dante finally confronted him again. "You've been avoiding me," Dante said, his voice low but firm. Luca froze, caught in the act, his heart thudding in his chest. "I haven't been avoiding you," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Dante's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, but with concern. "Yes, you have. You're afraid to let go, Luca. Afraid to let me in." His words hit harder than any accusation could have. "I'm not the enemy here," Dante continued softly, his hand resting on Luca's arm, grounding him. "But if you keep holding back, I won't be able to stay." Luca felt the sting of his own fear, and for the first time, he realized how much it had shaped his decisions. "I don't know how to do this," Luca admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to let myself be vulnerable." Dante's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his hand gently pulling Luca's chin up so their eyes met. "You don't have to be perfect," he whispered. "You just have to trust me. Trust us." In that moment, something inside Luca shifted. The fear wasn't gone, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable wall. He took a deep breath, stepping closer to Dante. "I'm trying. I really am," he whispered. Dante smiled softly, his fingers brushing against Luca's cheek. "I know." Chapter 12. Small Steps. After their conversation, the days felt lighter, though the underlying tension never fully dissipated. It wasn't easy to unlearn the habits of a lifetime, the walls that Luca had built so high. But Dante was patient, always offering small gestures of reassurance. There were moments when Luca would catch his breath at the sight of Dante's smile or the way his presence seemed to fill the room, and he realized, slowly, that maybe, just maybe, this was what it meant to feel something real. They shared small moments, a lingering touch, a soft laugh, a quiet dinner where conversation flowed easily. It wasn't always perfect, and there were still times when Luca felt the urge to pull back, to protect himself. But Dante never pushed. He was always there, just as present, just as steady. And that steadiness began to feel like a lifeline. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset together, Dante took Luca's hand in his. "You know, we don't have to have everything figured out right now," Dante said softly. "We can take it one step at a time." Luca turned to him, his heart swelling at the sincerity in Dante's voice. "I know," he replied quietly, "but I think I'm starting to believe in us." Dante's smile was soft, almost shy. "That's all I need to hear." Chapter 13. Facing the Future. Luca stood at the threshold of a new chapter, both figuratively and literally. The air between him and Dante had shifted, and with it, Luca felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. They were no longer tiptoeing around the unknown. They were facing it head-on, together. Still, there was a long road ahead. They both knew it. The uncertainties were far from gone, but they had something now, a foundation built on trust, honesty, and an unspoken promise to keep moving forward. Dante had never pushed him for more than he could give, but Luca had come to realize that the more he gave, the more he wanted to give. That evening, as they lay side by side in the quiet of their apartment, Luca reached out, his fingers brushing against Dante's in a simple gesture of connection. Dante turned to him, his expression soft, his gaze steady. "We'll face whatever comes next," he whispered together. Luca smiled, feeling the weight of their bond settle deep within him. "Together," he agreed, his voice filled with certainty. For the first time in a long time, Luca felt ready for whatever the future held. Chapter 14. Sudden Heat. The moment Luca entered the room, his gaze immediately locked with Dante's, an unspoken tension flaring between them. Dante didn't wait for a word. Instead, he crossed the room with purpose and pulled Luca into a kiss. It was urgent, demanding, as if the restraint they'd held onto was suddenly too much to bear. Luca responded in kind, his body pressing against Dante's with a need he hadn't realized was building. The kiss deepened, and the world outside the room faded into the background, leaving only the heat of their connection. Dante broke the kiss first, his breath ragged. "I can't keep doing this holding back," he confessed, his hands running over Luca's chest, desperate to feel him closer. "I don't want to hold back anymore." Luca's heart raced, but his answer was clear in his actions. He kissed Dante again, slower this time, savoring the feel of his lips, the warmth of his touch. He was done with the hesitation. There was no turning back now. Chapter 15. Unspoken Yearning. The days blurred by in a haze of passion and quiet intimacy. Luca and Dante no longer hesitated in their moments together, the connection between them deepening with each shared kiss, each lingering touch. But even as their bodies intertwined, there was something unspoken between them, a fear that neither of them was brave enough to voice. The deeper they fell into each other, the more they realized just how vulnerable they were becoming. One night, as they lay tangled in the sheets after another passionate encounter, Dante stroked Luca's hair, his eyes studying his face with an intensity that made Luca's heart flutter. "You're everything I never knew I needed," Dante said softly, his thumb tracing Luca's lips. The words were simple but charged with meaning, and Luca's chest tightened with a mixture of warmth and fear. He turned his head slightly, pressing a soft kiss to Dante's palm. "I never thought I'd feel this way. But I don't want to lose this," Luca admitted, his voice full of quiet vulnerability. "Neither do I," Luca whispered between kisses. His fingers slid down Dante's neck, his touch reverent and eager at the same time. Dante's response was to lift him, pressing him against the wall, his body aligning with Luca's as though it was the most natural thing in the world. The kiss became more desperate, more frantic, as they both gave into what had been simmering between them for so long. Finally, when the kiss broke for air, Dante smiled against Luca's lips. "This is what we've been waiting for," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. Luca didn't need any more words. He simply nodded, his arms wrapping around Dante, pulling him closer as their lips met once more. Luca reached for Dante's face, pulling him closer for a kiss that was slower, deeper, as if trying to convey everything he felt without words. Dante responded with equal intensity, his hands threading through Luca's hair as the kiss deepened, growing more heated by the second. It was as if they were trying to drown out all the fear and uncertainty with their touch, their kiss, because right now, all that mattered was the connection they shared. Chapter 16. Tension Building. The next day, the tension between them grew, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional. Each touch, each glance, seemed to carry more weight. Luca found himself thinking about Dante constantly, his thoughts consumed with everything between them, what they were, what they could be. It wasn't enough to just feel the attraction anymore. Luca wanted more, but the fear still clung to him like a second skin. That evening, as they stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner, the air between them felt thick, charged. Dante's fingers brushed against Luca's as they reached for the same plate, sending a shock of heat through Luca's body. He turned, eyes locking with Dante's. "We can't keep doing this," Luca muttered, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Dante stepped closer, closing the space between them. "What do you mean?" Dante asked, his voice hushed, as if the words could shatter something fragile. "You know what I mean," Luca replied, his hand moving to Dante's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I'm not sure if I can give you what you want. I'm scared of what happens when we go too far." Dante's hands cupped Luca's face, his thumbs gently brushing his cheek. "Luca, I'm not asking for more than you're ready to give. But we can't keep pretending like this is nothing." He leaned in, kissing Luca softly at first, then more urgently, as if trying to show him how much this meant without words. Luca kissed him back, his hands roaming to Dante's back, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. The taste of Dante, the heat of his body pressed so close it was intoxicating. Dante's hands slid down Luca's sides, his grip tightening as they kissed deeper, the world outside forgotten. "I don't want to pretend anymore," Luca breathed between kisses, his chest tight with emotion. Dante's eyes darkened, a slow smile spreading across his lips. "Then don't." Chapter 17. Overcoming Boundaries. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments, tender kisses, and whispered words. They were no longer afraid to touch, to kiss, to be close. But with each passing moment, the tension between them built, the desire for more gnawing at them both. One evening, after a long day, they found themselves in the living room, sitting close on the couch. It had started as a quiet moment, but it wasn't long before Luca's lips met Dante's once again, the kiss slow but charged with something deeper. Luca's hands wandered to Dante's neck, pulling him closer, needing more of him. Dante responded with equal hunger, his hands sliding down Luca's back, pulling him into his lap. The kiss was desperate now, as if both of them were trying to bridge the gap between want and fear. Luca broke the kiss for a moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "I can't keep pretending I don't want this," he confessed, his voice low, rough with desire. Dante's hands caressed his face, his thumb brushing over Luca's bottom lip. "Then stop pretending," he whispered, leaning in to kiss him again, this time deeper, more intense. Luca melted into him, his heart racing as Dante's kiss stole away all his hesitation. They were past the point of no return now, and neither of them wanted to stop. The kiss became more urgent, their bodies pressing closer, a perfect match in every way. "Dante," Luca breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of need and emotion. Dante responded by pulling him even closer, kissing him deeply, as if trying to show Luca just how much he meant to him. This was more than just physical, it was a connection, a bond that had grown deeper with each kiss, each shared moment. They had crossed a line, but neither of them was looking back. Chapter 18. No looking back. The days after that moment felt different. Everything had shifted. They no longer danced around each other, uncertain of what came next. They were moving forward together, facing whatever came their way. The intimacy between them had deepened, their kisses no longer just about passion, but about trust, about growing closer. Luca was no longer afraid to let himself fall that night. As they lay together in the quiet aftermath of another heated kiss, Dante's hand rested on Luca's chest, his thumb tracing slow circles on his skin. "I never thought I'd find this," Dante murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "You?" Luca turned to him, his eyes soft, his lips curling into a smile. "I didn't either," Luca replied, his voice tender. "But I'm not letting go now." Dante kissed him then, slow and sweet promise in each press of their lips, and for the first time, Luca didn't feel afraid. He was exactly where he needed to be. Chapter 19. The struggle within the next few days were a whirlwind of emotions, as Luca and Dante navigated their ever-deepening connection. Every moment seemed to hold something new, something thrilling, but also something terrifying. The closer they became, the more Luca felt a battle raging inside him. He wanted Dante more than anything, but fear of losing control still haunted him. One evening, as they shared dinner, Luca couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. "What if this isn't enough?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Dante paused, looking at him intently. "What do you mean?" His hand reached out to gently squeeze Luca's. Luca sighed, his eyes downcast. "I want you, I do. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what we're becoming." Dante stood and walked around the table to Luca's side, his fingers tilting Luca's chin up gently. "Luca, this is what we are," he whispered. "What we've always been, even if we didn't realize it. You don't have to be scared. I won't let you go." Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss, each moment laden with the emotions they hadn't yet voiced. It was a promise, a vow to face whatever came next together. When they broke the kiss, Luca's heart still hammered in his chest, but he felt something settle inside him, hope. "I'm not letting go either," Luca said, his voice quieter now, stronger. "But I need you to know. This is everything I never thought I'd have." Dante smiled, brushing his lips against Luca's one more time. "Then let me show you how much it can be." Chapter 20. No more secrets. By now, Luca and Dante had reached a silent understanding. No more hesitation. No more doubts. Their relationship wasn't just built on passion. It was rooted in something much deeper. They didn't need to speak it aloud, but every touch, every kiss, conveyed it clearly. They were in this together, no matter what. The evening was peaceful, just the two of them curled up on the couch, laughing over a movie they'd seen 100 times. But there was a shift in the air, a quiet tension that had been building between them. Dante reached out, brushing a lock of hair from Luca's face, his eyes soft. "Luca, there's something I need to say." His voice was serious now, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You've shown me more than I ever thought I'd have. You've opened me up in ways I didn't know were possible." Luca's heart swelled. "I feel the same way," he said, leaning in closer. He kissed Dante lightly, then more deeply. Their mouths moved in perfect harmony, a soft exploration that felt as though the kiss was an extension of everything they'd shared so far. It was slow, almost reverent, as if they were saying everything they couldn't put into words. Chapter 18. No looking back. The days after that moment felt different. Everything had shifted. They no longer danced around each other, uncertain of what came next. They were moving forward together, facing whatever came their way. The intimacy between them had deepened, their kisses no longer just about passion, but about trust, about growing closer. Luca was no longer afraid to let himself fall that night. As they lay together in the quiet aftermath of another heated kiss, Dante's hand rested on Luca's chest, his thumb tracing slow circles on his skin. "I never thought I'd find this," Dante murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "You?" Luca turned to him, his eyes soft, his lips curling into a smile. "I didn't either," Luca replied, his voice tender. "But I'm not letting go now." Dante kissed him then, slow and sweet promise in each press of their lips, and for the first time, Luca didn't feel afraid. He was exactly where he needed to be. Chapter 19. The struggle within the next few days were a whirlwind of emotions, as Luca and Dante navigated their ever-deepening connection. Every moment seemed to hold something new, something thrilling, but also something terrifying. The closer they became, the more Luca felt a battle raging inside him. He wanted Dante more than anything, but fear of losing control still haunted him. One evening, as they shared dinner, Luca couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. "What if this isn't enough?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Dante paused, looking at him intently. "What do you mean?" His hand reached out to gently squeeze Luca's. Luca sighed, his eyes downcast. "I want you, I do. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what we're becoming." Dante stood and walked around the table to Luca's side, his fingers tilting Luca's chin up gently. "Luca, this is what we are," he whispered. "What we've always been, even if we didn't realize it. You don't have to be scared. I won't let you go." Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss, each moment laden with the emotions they hadn't yet voiced. It was a promise, a vow to face whatever came next together. When they broke the kiss, Luca's heart still hammered in his chest, but he felt something settle inside him, hope. "I'm not letting go either," Luca said, his voice quieter now, stronger. "But I need you to know. This is everything I never thought I'd have." Dante smiled, brushing his lips against Luca's one more time. "Then let me show you how much it can be." Chapter 20. No more secrets. By now, Luca and Dante had reached a silent understanding. No more hesitation. No more doubts. Their relationship wasn't just built on passion. It was rooted in something much deeper. They didn't need to speak it aloud, but every touch, every kiss, conveyed it clearly. They were in this together, no matter what. The evening was peaceful, just the two of them curled up on the couch, laughing over a movie they'd seen 100 times. But there was a shift in the air, a quiet tension that had been building between them. Dante reached out, brushing a lock of hair from Luca's face, his eyes soft. "Luca, there's something I need to say." His voice was serious now, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You've shown me more than I ever thought I'd have. You've opened me up in ways I didn't know were possible." Luca's heart swelled. "I feel the same way," he said, leaning in closer. He kissed Dante lightly, then more deeply. Their mouths moved in perfect harmony, a soft exploration that felt as though the kiss was an extension of everything they'd shared so far. It was slow, almost reverent, as if they were saying everything they couldn't put into words. Dante pulled away just enough to look at him, his eyes searching Luca's face. "I think I love you," Hugh whispered. The simple words sent a rush of warmth through Luca, making his chest tighten. "I think I love you too," Luca replied, the words coming more easily than he thought they would. Dante's lips captured his again, a deep kiss that spoke of everything they felt for each other. Trust, passion, love, and commitment. Chapter 21. Breaking boundaries. The days after that admission were filled with a new kind of intensity. Neither Luca nor Dante could seem to get enough of each other. Their kisses became more frequent, their touches more intimate, each one a deeper connection to the other. They were no longer just falling into something, they had already fallen, and now they were building something stronger than either of them had expected. It was late one night, after a long day, when the electricity between them finally snapped. Dante's hands roamed over Luca's back, his lips trailing down Luca's neck, leaving a trail of soft kisses. Luca gasped at the feel of Dante's lips on his skin, his fingers tangling in Dante's hair, pulling him closer. Their bodies pressed together, the heat between them undeniable, raw. "I want you," Dante whispered against Luca's neck, his voice low and filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down Luca's spine. Luca's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he felt as though he might lose himself entirely in the feeling. "I want you too," Luca responded, his voice shaky but determined. The kiss that followed was pure fire, wild and untamed. It was no longer about restraint or hesitation. They gave themselves completely to the other, their bodies and hearts interlocking in a way that felt inevitable, right? In that moment, nothing existed but the two of them, the world outside forgotten. There was no turning back, and neither of them wanted to. Chapter 22. Growing together as their relationship deepened, Luca and Dante found that the best parts of their bond were the quiet moments, those times when they didn't have to speak, but simply existed in each other's presence. They would walk hand in hand through the city, sharing smiles and small gestures that spoke volumes. Their kisses, though still frequent, felt more grounded, more meaningful as they built their future together. One afternoon, as they sat in the park, enjoying the warm sun, Dante turned to Luca, his expression serious but affectionate. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, his hand resting on Luca's. Luca looked up, meeting Dante's gaze. He thought about it often, but the thought of their future always felt uncertain until now. "Yeah, I think about it a lot," Luca replied, his thumb brushing over Dante's hand. "And I think about how I want you in it. All of it." Dante smiled, his eyes softening. "I want that too," he said, his voice full of conviction. They leaned in to kiss, the gesture gentle, but there was something new there, a shared understanding of what they wanted and where they were headed. This wasn't just about passion anymore. This was about building something real. Their kisses, now, were a reflection of that bond, a deep, steady pulse of connection. It was love, in its simplest and most profound form, growing stronger with each passing day. Chapter 23. No turning back. With each passing day, Luca and Dante's connection grew, becoming something unbreakable. They had crossed so many lines they never thought they'd cross, and yet, each step brought them closer, deeper into the relationship they had both longed for. They didn't need to define what they had anymore. It was simple, real, and undeniable. One night, as they lay in each other's arms, Luca pressed a soft kiss to Dante's lips, his heart full. "I'm not afraid anymore," he whispered. "Not of us, not of what we're becoming." Dante's hand cupped his face, and he kissed Luca softly in return. "Neither am I," he murmured. "We've made it this far. There's no going back now." Luca smiled, his fingers tracing the lines of Dante's jaw. "Good," he said, his voice filled with certainty. They kissed again, slow and deep, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 24. Unspoken Promises. By now, Luca and Dante had fallen into an undeniable rhythm. the space between them always filled with a palpable sense of affection. Each day brought something new, some small discovery about one another that made their connection stronger. But still, Luca couldn't shake the feeling that something big was on the horizon, a moment where their bond would truly be tested. One quiet evening, they sat on the balcony, staring out at the skyline. Dante's arm was draped around Luca, his fingers gently tracing circles on Luca's arm. "Do you ever wonder if we're making the right choice?" Dante asked quietly. Luca tilted his head, his eyes meeting Dante's. "We've already made it," he said, his voice calm and certain. "There's no right or wrong in this. Only us." Dante leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to Luca's forehead. "I think we've always known it was meant to be." The words hung in the air, so simple, yet so true. Their love was built on trust, patience, and understanding. And as their lips met in a tender kiss, Luca realized he didn't need anything more. He was right where he was supposed to be. Chapter 25. Forever and Beyond. As the days turned into weeks, their relationship only grew stronger, becoming something more than they had ever expected. They no longer worried about the future. They simply embraced what they had in the present, knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it together. One evening, as they were walking through the streets, Luca stopped suddenly, turning to face Dante with a serious look in his eyes. Dante noticed the change instantly, his own expression turning equally serious. "What's wrong?" he asked. Luca shook his head with a soft smile. "Nothing. I just wanted to say, I'm in this for the long haul. For us. Always." Dante's heart swelled at the words, and he reached for Luca's hand, pulling him close. Their lips met, deep and slow, the kiss full of unspoken promises. There was no longer any need for fear or hesitation. They had come this far, and nothing would ever change that. "I'm with you too," Dante whispered as they pulled away. Forever. Their future was uncertain, but for the first time, they knew they were ready to face it, together. And as they walked off into the night, hand in hand, they knew that this was only the beginning.